Okay, I am doing a video now on the First Corps' arrival at Gettysburg. And as you can see in front of me, there is a sign that says "Welcome to Pennsylvania." As I cross this sign, I am crossing the Mason-Dixon line, and I am now in the state of Pennsylvania. I'm in a little town called Fairplay, Pennsylvania, which is part of Freedom Township. It's an unincorporated town that did not exist during the Civil War. It does share the same zip code as Gettysburg. So at the time in 1863, this was Gettysburg. And at the point that we just crossed, the First Corps of the Army of Potomac on June 30th, 1863, crossed this position into Pennsylvania, and they entered Gettysburg officially. They would take this road, which is Business 15, up into the town of Gettysburg, where they would be engaged just west of town on July 1st, 1863. This has been the First Corps' arrival at Gettysburg, Part 1, on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Standing here at the Moritz Tavern, and this is going to be the First Corps' arrival at Gettysburg, Part 2. On Part 1, we entered into the state line of Pennsylvania, about a mile and a half south here on the Emmitsburg Road. As the First Corps marched northward on the Emmitsburg Road, they reached the Moritz Tavern here. This tavern was the last place that their commanding officer, John Fulton Reynolds, spent his final night on the earth on June 30th, 1863. Early in the morning, as the First Corps passed up the Emmitsburg Road, they passed right by the Moritz Tavern. This tavern was built in the late 1700s, and I did more detailed information on it on my 11th Corps' arrival at Gettysburg, so you want to go back and watch those videos. From here, they proceeded northward on the Emmitsburg Road, passing what is today the Bullfrog Road, which was a turnpike that went from Pittsburgh to Baltimore at the time. But they headed in this direction up here, toward the town of Gettysburg. So we'll pick that up in Part 3. But this has been the First Corps' arrival at Gettysburg, Part 2, on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. First Corps arrival at Gettysburg, Part 3, on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. As the First Corps marched toward Gettysburg, northbound on the Emmitsburg Road, which is coming toward our camera, they were being led by, of course, General John F. Reynolds. They made their way from our last stop, which was the Moritz Tavern, north on the Emmitsburg Road, passing by the Sherfey peach orchard, which you see there in the distance, coming in this direction, heading toward Gettysburg. And of course, one of the things that they've seen when they were passing by here was the Sherfey peach orchard farmstead, which we're looking at now on our left-hand side. The barn is a reconstructed barn. The original barn was burned during the Battle of Gettysburg. You can go back and watch my videos on the 114th PA Coliseums at Gettysburg. But the soldiers marched right by the Sherfey home, which you can see here through the trees on the left, and continued northbound up the Emmitsburg Road. And up the Emmitsburg Road there, right at the bend, you can see the Klingel House. Also, the Wentz House once stood right over here near the peach orchard. It doesn't stand any longer, but they passed by the Wentz. Of course, they passed by the Sherfey House. Up in the distance, a bit around the bend, is the Klingel House. Then further to the left, over back this direction, you can see about a half a mile in the field there would be the Henry Spangler Farm, or the Spangler Farm rather, and then further down the road on the Emmitsburg Pike, the old site of the Rogers House, and then of course our next video will be shot at the Cordori Farm, where John Reynolds split off from the First Corps, and the First Corps started in a different direction. This has been the First Corps arrival at Gettysburg on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Okay, this is going to be First Corps arrival at Gettysburg on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook, Part 3. I am here at the property of the Philip Snyder House, which you can see right here in front of me, and I'm looking northbound on the Emmitsburg Pike, or today the Emmitsburg Road. Across the road is Little Round Top, and then behind the tree there is Big Round Top. In the morning of July 1st, 1863, we already seen the First Corps under John F. Reynolds come from the Moritz Tavern after entering into Pennsylvania, passing by the Moritz Tavern rather, and then making its way northbound here on the Emmitsburg Pike. One of the houses that they would have passed would have been the Philip Snyder house, as well as the George Rose farm, which is right here in the center. And to the right, they would have seen these two large hills, which would, their next day, gain notoriety as the Round Tops. On parts 4 and 5, we're going to follow the route of the First Corps as they make their way to the battle on the northwestern. This is the First Corps' arrival at Gettysburg, Part 4, here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And we left off Part 3 down near the Sherfey farm off the Emmitsburg Road, which is in the direction of the camera is facing. And the First Corps headed up this road, which is the Emmitsburg Road, or the Emmitsburg Pike, northbound in the direction that we're now facing. And they arrived here at the Cordori farm. Now the barn that's here is a reconstructed barn. It's not the original barn. However, the house is an original. This farm in 1863 raised cattle. And the cattle that were raised on this farm were slaughtered and then taken to the Cordori business, which is the Hoke Cordori house that is on the York Street in Gettysburg, just east of the square. They had a butcher shop there where the cattle that were slaughtered were taken there and then sold at market. Today that building is called the Brafferton Inn. This is the original Cordori farmhouse here. Now, at this point, what had happened was the First Corps soldiers, the infantry, split off from John Reynolds and a few members of his staff. Now the infantry headed in a northwest direction where our camera is facing here toward the Lutheran Seminary, where the battle had already began between Buford's cavalry and Confederate infantry. John Reynolds and his staff rode forward into the town of Gettysburg, and you'll want to go back and watch my videos called Forward, For God's Sake Forward, parts 1 through 12. And you'll see on part 4 of that series the split off here as well. But this is the point of split between John F. Reynolds and his First Corps of Infantry. This has been the First Corps' arrival at Gettysburg, part 4 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. First Corps arrival at Gettysburg, part 5. And in part 4 we left off at the Cordori house, which in the distance you can see the roof of the Cordori barn here. Now it was at this point where the First Corps of the infantry under John Fulton Reynolds split from John Reynolds and his staff. John Reynolds and his staff continued up the Emmitsburg Road into the town of Gettysburg, while the First Corps infantry actually came in the direction across here, headed toward our camera and passed just in front of the Bliss farm, which was at one time stood right over here in this area here. And you go back and watch our videos on the battle at the Bliss farm of July 2nd and 3rd, 1863 to get an idea of what would happen the very next day. But on July 1st, the First Corps passed right through these fields and down onto Long Lane just behind this tree here. And of course they would end up over by the Lutheran Theological Seminary, and it would arrive just in time to relieve John Buford's cavalry, who had dismounted and held back the enemy in check for a couple hours until this First Corps infantry arrived. They would also get help later on from the 11th Corps, but the First Corps was the first one over here on the battlefield at the seminary. The 11th Corps would later attach themselves to their right. But this has been part 5 of the First Corps' arrival at Gettysburg on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. First Corps' arrival at Gettysburg, part 6 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And we are currently here at the David McMillan house, and we are standing on the southeast corner of the property. And in front of us is the historic McMillan Lane, which you can see by the fence line, which runs right down to the historic Long Lane. And we just left off where the First Corps split off from John Reynolds at the Cordori property, which you can see the barn here in the distance. And then they crossed by the William Bliss farm, and then they came out in this direction. David McMillan came out of the front of his house, which is today the rear of the house, came out here and started tearing down fences so that the First Corps Union soldiers could make their way from here and cross over to the Lutheran Seminary over here in the distance. So this is really a neat area of the battlefield because it's pristine, and you can see the old sunken road here, the McMillan Lane, and that leads down to the old historic Long Lane, which went over toward Pickett's Charge Fields and the William Bliss Farm. This has been First Corps Arrival at Gettysburg, Part 6 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook.